Welcome to episode number 25 of the Tiger 700 project. In our last episode, we finished stage number 3, the foam stage. So let's move on to stage number 4, where we'll be applying plaster to the foam buck. Now, there's many different kinds of plaster at your home improvement store. Joint compound is best for this application because we're going to be using a lot of it all over the body, and joint compound shrinks less. Joint compound also has more glue in it, so it will stick to the foam without any problem. So, let's get started. It's white! I finally started the next phase of the body, and that is plaster. Applying plaster on top of the foam, and that allows you to get a much finer degree of smoothness. And thank God, I was really getting tired of that pink. So I'm just getting started on this. You can see, get a better idea of what it looks like now in white. I think it really does show off some of the curves. And what I'm using in the plaster stage is just that, plaster. So you can see I've got two different kinds of plaster here. I've got something they call platinum patch. It's made by DAP. And it's actually an exterior grade plaster. May be used on clapboards or filling in holes in masonry or whatnot. And when this stuff dries, it's really hard. So I am using that first off to fill in some of the big holes. Now it is sandable, but it's tough to sand. So it's just to fill in the big holes before I start on the joint compound. Now joint compound is much softer. It goes on very easily. It goes on just like body filler. But it sands very, very easily. I mean, with a fraction of the amount of effort. So, going over the entire thing, once I've got the holes filled with joint compound, and that's joint compound versus spackling or patch compound, did some research and found that joint compound shrink less. It's got more glue in it, so it sticks to the foam readily, and it flows on really nice. Down below you can see I'm using basically body tools. Squeegees, I've got 3 different sizes here. I've got the tan one's a little bit longer for the big sections. And then I've got a small square one. And then this one I've cut in a compound curve. It was the same as the square one. And that helps me get in some of the inside curves. The plaster's dry now, and you work it just like body filler with body filler tools. I use 80 grit. I find that's a good compromise. It pulls the plaster off pretty rapidly, but still with plenty of control to get a flat surface. Here we go. It does cost an awful lot of dust, so make sure you protect your lungs. Don't know if you can see this on the camera, but just even those few strokes I just did, of course took off most of the ridges from the plaster on there, but it cuts really fast and it doesn't clog the paper. Every minute I spend on the plaster stage and getting it straight and smooth is going to save me time once I get to the fiberglass and body filler stage. In addition, you end up using a lot of filler, whether it's plaster or body filler. For example, I have used 4 of these tubs. Now these only cost about 15 bucks a tub for plaster. It's a lot more expensive for body filler. Excuse me, I've got some sanding to do. So it's dried overnight, and I'm starting to sand it. And you can see I've got the center section there just recently sanded, and this is what it looks like once the joint compound has dried. Again here, what I'm using is automotive sanding type blocks. I've got a long block for the long straight ones, and I've got a short one for the real curvy sections. I could probably use one in between, to be honest. But using that along with this compound, you sprinkle on, and it shows you all the low spots. So you pound that on, you sand it just like it was body filler. And you can see here I've got a lot of high and low spots. This is my first coat. So you can see the pink foam starting to show through. Those were the high spots. And then the white spots were the places where there was enough plaster applied, where that did fill in the areas. And the black spotches are places that were not thick enough. I need to go over those. But to be honest, there's so many on the panel, I'll probably just go over the entire panel and start again. And hopefully in the next coat, I'll only have a few spots left on this panel. Here's what the car looks like at the end of the plaster phase. I think you can begin to see what it's going to look like, how the surfaces curve and work together. The lights have been pulled out, but there's a surface there where I can start adding fiberglass. When I pulled it off my chassis table, there was a little bit of a bump, not really bad, but you can see like right here, it cracked. The whole rear of it cracked. There's other cracks over here, right in this area, down in here, and there's a few others, which shows you how fragile it still is. So I'm anxious to get it into fiberglass to help toughen the skin and reduce these cracks from happening. Now, as bad as they look, it's really not that big of a deal. All I need to do is sand it down just around the edges to make sure I've got a smooth surface there, and the fiberglass will go right over it. I just don't want a ridge. So that's it for the plaster stage. Let's move on to epoxy, step 5, to toughen this body up. Before you apply the fiberglass and polyester resin, you need to seal the entire car in an epoxy. The reason you need to do that is because there is styrene in the polyester resin, and this is expanded polystyrene foam. So the resin, the polyester resin, will actually melt the foam buck. So just taking a closer look, you can see it's got a green color now. The reason for that is I did put some dye in the epoxy, some green dye, so I could see where it was going on the car, and it really helped a lot to ensure that I wasn't missing any little spots. So that's why it's green. So as we come up a little closer, I got what I call an alligator effect. I don't know if you can see this, but all these little cracks. Every little crack. And a lot of these cracks I don't think were in here before I applied the epoxy. So it looks like it soaked into certainly the foam, but also the plaster, and soaked down in. I think it expanded, and then it left the cracks like that. It's not a problem. It does cause a little bit of a surface kind of defect in there, but nothing that the fiberglass won't hide, so I'm not worried about it. I am happy to say that it's the buck has gotten much more sturdy. Just applying that coat of just epoxy and no reinforcements has made quite a difference.